This bowl of ramen is the first of its kind and it will set your heart ablaze, and I made it for one reason: Rengoku. I wanted to pay tribute to the flame Hashira in the only way I knew how, with food and my cooking. It's both comforting and electric. This was a dish I was so enamored with that I made it the focus of my panel at Anime NYC in November. The creative process from start to finish consumed me for a week straight. I knew I had to make this. Rengoku is a character that both makes you want to work as hard as possible, but he's also super kind and caring. There are certain spices that reflect both of these aspects: cooling and warming spices. You may be wondering, Paul, how are you coming up with this ridiculous recipe? And let me tell you how, with the help of French guy cooking Alex. He's not currently here right now, but I have a poster of him, which also sounds weird. I ordered this poster from Alex French guy cooking, absolutely love it, and this represents all of the things you would need for ramen. You got the noodles, you got the nori, you got the tamago, which is the egg, you have the menma, which are just toppings, right? Then you have the broth and the soup and all of these things. What this tells me is ramen a process, or is it a dish? I just made so many people angry. With Szechuan Peppercorn noodles on the mind, I went for it. I've made ramen noodles a few times over the years, and with the help of Ryan from Way of Ramen, I'm able to make them to a passable degree. I just had to make sure that the peppercorns were ground fine enough to not interrupt the gluten forming process. And honestly, that was easy enough. Make sure you always wipe this out, okay? Don't leave Szechuan peppercorns in here for later. Into the bowl went my ingredients along with some toasted and ground peppercorns. After mixing everything together, I placed it into a plastic bag and let it rest for half an hour. After letting it rest for that half hour, I did the step on the noodles trick to achieve gluten perfection. I guess I could get my steps in. It's not a bad way to do this. And for anybody who wants to actually try to make this Rengoku ramen, the recipe is in the description down below. Once we've stepped on the dough creating gluten perfection, this is when we put it through our pasta roller a couple of times, make sure we cut it with that spaghetti setting, dust it with a bit of cornstarch, and keep it ready for the final dish. You could also freeze this for about 2 to 3 months if you really want to, or keep it in the fridge overnight. Nothing is like fresh noodles. Nothing. After you're done with the noodles, the next part is the soup, and for that, I went with butternut squash. I don't think I've ever had a butternut squash ramen soup base, and if you guys have, let me know in the comments down below. There's a first time for everything, right? Since this butternut squash is so big, I'm cutting it in half before I go ahead and peel it. Once it's peeled, this is when we cut it in half again, remove any seeds, and you can keep these and toast these if you want to for later, and then just make sure you dice it up and place this into a large bowl. Now here comes the fun part. We get to coat this with some olive oil and Chinese 5-spice. Chinese 5-spice actually has some star anise, some cloves, Chinese cinnamon, some Szechuan pepper, and some fennel seeds all mixed in, so we're technically using more than one spice. It goes incredibly well on butternut squash, but I've also never had it in ramen before, so I'm really excited to give this a taste. Place all of your seasoned squash into a very large stock pot and cover it with just enough water to make sure it covers the top of that squash. Now we're going to simmer this over a medium heat for about 2 hours. Now while the butternut squash is working, I wanted to say thank you to this week's sponsor, Vessi. Yes, I'm going to do it like this. Vessi is a shoe that I've come to know and love. Not only is it vegan friendly, made with sustainable and recycled materials, it's also made of this really cool Dynatex material that is named after some Pokemon, probably. There's like 1,000 of them now. What it means is that the shoes are completely waterproof. You can go puddle jumping, do errands in the rain. I live in the Northwest, so we get a lot of rain, and these are my go-to now. I wear the everyday move Vessi shoes for when I'm outside training or just going for a long walk because it's always wet, or I wear the everyday shoe for just things that I need to do around town. Not only are they super comfortable, but they fit basically every outfit that I have. If you use my code down below, you're gonna get yourself $25 off your first order. So make sure you head to Vessi.com using that link down below. Use that code to get yourself $25 off, and thank you to Vessi for sponsoring today's video. I'm gonna go put on some pants. While he's putting pants on, let's finish up this soup. Once the squash is super tender, blend the absolutely massive amount you decided to make. Make sure you give some to your neighbors because that is sharing and caring. That's what Rengoku would do. So I went to give my neighbors some of that soup, and how awesome is this? We trade food all the time, and they handed me this giant kabocha squash. We're going to absolutely have to put this on this ramen now. Get the rest of your soup blended up and put away, and make sure that this is fully cooled down before you pop it in the fridge for later. Make sure you keep the liquid that you cooked the squash in, so this way we can thin out the soup later if we need to. But now with our soup base done, we need to move on to a few more ingredients, in particular the tare. And the tare that I'm leaning into for this is Shio Tare. A miso or shoyu tare may have not gone as well with the butternut squash, so that's why I wanted to focus on the Shio Tare, which is just good old salt, and mirin, and sake, and soy sauce, and sugar. Yep, mix it all together, bring it to a simmer, and bam, Shio Tare. Thanks again, Ryan. I really appreciate this one. Next up is the aroma oil. In this case, paprika aroma oil. This adds that nice smokiness to help the overall dish and give it a lot of depth of flavor with all the other things that are going into it. To make this, you really just need 3 times the amount of oil to however much paprika you're using. Heat this up for about 3 to 5 minutes just before anything starts to smoke. Remove it from the heat, strain it, and your paprika oil is done. Now for the pork chashu. Well, kinda. It's kind of chashu, okay? Don't kill me. I decided not to roll up my pork belly and go with the slab so that way I can slather it in honey butter. Yes, I did say honey butter. So in a bag your pork goes along with a combination of soy sauce, mirin, sake, and a touch of water just to help dilute some of that saltiness. Pour the solution into the bag with the pork, making sure that it's fully covered, seal it, pop it in the fridge for at least 4 to 6 hours. Yes, this ramen does take 2 to 3 days to make. You ready? Ready for this pork? Yes, we are ready for this pork. Because even after we've marinated for 4 to 6 hours, we still need to bake this thing off. So remove it from the marinade and place it on a baking rack, so this way it cooks really evenly. We're also going to be scoring the pork skin, so this way we have a little more texture when it ends up cooking. We're going to bake this thing off at 300 degrees Fahrenheit for about 3.5 to 4 hours while slathering it in honey butter. Yes, honey butter. Oh, and the honey butter is just equal parts softened butter and some really nice organic honey. Soy sauce plus butter plus honey is actually a very magical combination and it should be embraced. I mean, just look at how beautiful this chashu is. Have you ever seen anything this glorious? After that first glaze, pop it back in the oven for another 15 minutes. Let's see what this pork looks. I'm genuinely happy about what it looks like right now. Oh, look at, oh, Gandalf. You can't have this, buddy. But remember, with any good pork chashu, you do have to let this rest and cool down completely before you cut into it. Do not cut into this while it's hot. It will not hold its shape, guys. Please. But like traditional chashu, I am gonna let this cool down. You don't want to cut this right now because it's just gonna shred apart. So let this cool down to room temperature for about an hour, then refrigerate it for a few hours before we slice it. Keep it away from the cats because he's looking at me real funny right now. Now there are only 2 more components we need for our toppings, and one of them is going to be this beautiful kabocha squash that the neighbor gave us. Start off by removing the top, giving it a nice whiff because it smells so nice and sweet. Cut this thing in half, and yes, it does take a little bit of effort, revealing the inside of the kabocha squash. We do need to remove all of those seeds. But before we remove the seeds, make sure you do trim off the skin because it can be somewhat tough. You can also leave the skin on, but I prefer to have it off. After peeling the squash, remove any of those excess seeds that we talked about earlier, and then give these a nice slice. After slicing them, place them into a large bowl, and we're gonna get ready to season this. And the seasonings are simple here. We're just using a bit of olive oil followed by some salt and black pepper. Give these a nice toss, and we're going to bake these at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 to 18 minutes or until they're tender. And the final topping we're going to be using for this Rengoku ramen is going to be some leeks, but not any leeks. We are going to be making butter melted leeks. Grab yourself 1 or 2 leeks, make sure they are rinsed, cut these things in half, and then slice them super thin. Once they are thinly sliced, place this into a large bowl and then rinse them again because leeks can be very dirty and very gross. Once they're clean, make sure they're as dry as possible by straining any excess water. Place this into a pot with a very hefty amount of butter. I'm going for about 60 to 80 grams worth of butter. Bro, can you stop fingering the butter? You want the butter to start cooking those leeks and they'll start to soften and they'll start to sweeten and they turn into this delicious, leaky, buttery nonsense that you just want to rub all over your body. Why would you put that in your mouth? Now with all of our pieces ready, we can finally combine Voltron. I'm going to reheat some of my butternut squash soup and thin this out with some of the butternut squash water. This stuff is super strong, so if you're making this, make sure you go easy on this. We're just using enough just to thin it out slightly. The goal really is to have it look like ramen broth, which is still going to be very difficult using butternut squash, but try your best. After mixing it, give it a taste and see if it needs any more seasoning. It's fantastic. With that ready to go, place it on the stove to heat up. Now the Shio Tare, place this into a pot and throw it on the stove. I got a lot of stuff over here on the stove. This is just so we're prepared, Paul. Now grab all of your toppings and have those ready. Look at it. Perfect timing. Maybe. I don't know if they're actually cooked. Bro, don't eat all the toppings. Oh, they're cooked? They're really hot. Now to get this thing going, plop in 2 portions worth of your ramen noodles into some boiling water. I'm doing 2 portions because I am making a bowl for the waifu. Now add in a few ladles worth of your tare followed by a large helping of your soup. Remember, you can adjust those ratios depending on how you want it to taste. Next, slice a few pieces of your pork and grab yourself a sheet tray where you can lay it down on. Place a few pieces of your kabocha squash directly into your mouth and onto the sheet tray so this way it's ready to reheat. I'm reheating it with a blowtorch, but feel free to just place it back in the toaster oven on the broil setting just to make sure it's nice and warm again. By now, those noodles should be nicely cooked, so after they're drained, place them into your bowl of soup and then do this method where you kind of pull the noodles up so this way it fully coats it with the soup. Then arrange your pork as beautifully as possible. Realize that you didn't like that way, place it again into the bowl as hopefully beautifully as possible this time, followed by arranging some of your kabocha squash, layer on on a nice helping of your melted leeks, followed by some fresh green onions, and I am using a poached egg instead of an ajitama. Finally, drizzle it with some of that paprika oil, and there it is, the Rengoku ramen. Through all of my research, I didn't really find pumpkin ramen. I haven't found anything that utilizes fall spices. They're not very big, and this is just something that I wanted to try. You know what, we're just gonna dive in. It almost reminds me of like curry ramen, the texture. Oh, look at those nudes. Look at how well those held up. Cheers, there's a lot of noodles. It's really subtle. Or the butternut squash soup, it's not overpowering. It almost tastes like a curry ramen, especially with the Szechuan peppercorn. Ooh, I'm going for another bite. I could definitely eat this whole bowl and then pass out for a couple of hours. The pork definitely needed some more time. Good flavor, not as tender as I would want it. And then some of the melted leeks. And the squash. This is delicious. What's also delicious is the 7-ingredient bento box I made from Demon Slayer Mugen Train. You should totally click and check that out. My name is Chef PK, and remember, keep playing with your food.